Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Long Game Podcast with me, your host, Jason Osborne, and my esteemed co host, Ben Scallon. How are you this week, Ben, after what I hope wasn't too frightening a Halloween?
Yeah, terrifying, honestly. I think it was a lot scarier for some in the NGO sector who likely had a heart attack at some of the Taoiseach and Taoiseach's recent interventions. So I'd say there was quite a bit of spooky goings on around the Irish Refugee Council offices and the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission and all of them. No scarier experience than uh, a liberal NGO being presented with ideas they don't agree with from people who pay their wages.
Yeah, no, I had the fright of my life this morning. Well, I jested, I didn't really, but it was a nice reminder of aging and the natural processes that we can't escape. Because I don't know if the picture quality will be sufficiently improved for viewers people who do watch it on YouTube to tell. But I'm using a new camera today for this, and I feel like a real podcaster now. So I got my microphone in front of me, I've got my camera here, and I've got a laptop here. Whereas previously I was doing it like some sort of boom, where I literally just have my laptop in front of me with its substandard camera. But every time I turn my head now to look at the laptop, I was telling you before we go on that I can see my sweet Norwood here. Um, which is a nice reminder of yeah, say the inability to avoid aging. So there's that. But
Just promises, Jason, and I'll make a pact with you right now. Both of us will agree and pinky swear on this right now that if either of us starts losing our hair, to immediately just shave it all off because there's nothing worse. And I'd actually like to make an intervention to any of our viewers who are watching right now. If you have a receding hairline and your hair is going, please just give up because it's something that no one in your life is going to tell you out of politeness. So if that's why you come to this podcast, is you want brutal honesty, and that's what you're going to get.
Yeah, better to go down with dignity. We say that now, the viewers are going to tune in next week, and I'll turn my head, and like here will all here be like colored black. It'll be very clearly marked.
Either that or you're off for 1 week and then the next week you come back, you have very obvious hair plugs, like you went to
Like, yeah, my face is swollen out of heal. Um, but anyway, lest we annoy the more cantankerous viewers amongst our base who get annoyed by our digressions, we'll proceed with today's show. And today we're going to kick off with, yeah, what you alluded to a couple of minutes ago about the immigration. Well, it might be a strong way to put it. The immigration swing the government is currently undergoing. I'm a little critical. I'm not particularly convinced that it's an immigration swing of any kind, but certainly the rhetoric has swung. So we're going to talk about that first. Then we're going to talk about was it it wasn't today Micheál Martin made these comments. Was it when was it he made these in relation to the EU planning being what's regulations being what's holding up home building?
Yeah, it was last night. He was saying that over the weekend. Yeah.
There you go. So yeah, last night, and then the last thing we're going to talk about is, I think we'll leave it a cliffhanger till we actually get to it. It's the biggest bomb most Western countries are sitting on that no one talks about. Well, people at Gript talk about, but most normal people aren't talking about it, and they really should be, as we're going to explain shortly. So, without further ado, Ben, would you like to lead us into the government's far right stance on immigration now?
Yeah, the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach have both made very dramatic lurches to the right, at least in their rhetoric on immigration. Whether that will be followed up with tangible action, we will see in the weeks and months ahead. But as many people will have seen, I was speaking to Taoiseach Simon Harris last week, and I was asking him questions about our immigration system, and he said that the number of asylum seekers coming into the country is too high, that there's too many false asylum claimants that aren't leaving the country once they're given a deportation order. And he said that he's actually considering detaining people. If you are given a deportation order and you're found to have not left the state, that you should literally be arrested by authorities, which is common sense. I think anybody with a brain would say that that was probably the way to go. But it is significant that it's now the government saying this, who probably would have screamed at people like us and accused us of being far right just 2 months ago if we had said the same thing. And I have evidence of that directly, which we'll be referencing in a bit. But
Oh,
this was this was very controversial when he said it among the media and the NGO sector, and nobody else, by the way, everyone else was like, yeah, fair enough. But for the small cadre of extremely hyper progressive people with loud megaphones, they were quite upset about this. So the Taoiseach was receiving pushback about it. Simon Harris was receiving pushback about it. And both of them, to their credit, doubled down. Simon Harris said, actually, you know what? Not only is the number of asylum seekers coming into the country too high, the level of immigration in general, legal and illegal, is too high. The whole thing we need to be taking a look at it. And then Taoiseach Micheál Martin said, yeah, and 80%, up to 80% of people in the asylum system are false claimants. They're economic migrants who have no right to be here. And the message needs to go out there. If you're going to come to Ireland and make a false asylum claim, don't bother. That's what Taoiseach Micheál Martin said. So
I bet as soon as he made that statement, as soon as he got out of the way, the media cameras and things, he got inside and his limbs were shaking. Like he couldn't believe what he's become.
Yeah, he's just looking in the mirror like, oh my gosh, here, it's all come to this. And of course, this is all coming on the back of a calamitous ass whooping that was dealt out just the week prior at the presidential election, where the government lost in a landslide and it was a crushing defeat for them. And that primarily happened, as we discussed on last week's podcast, because they were abandoned by middle and right-wing voters and they left the field wide open for the left. And so they're now clearly taking this problem deadly seriously, and they are, at least in their rhetoric, making a very transparent gambit to try and win back some of those voters that they've lost. And I want to hear your thoughts on this, Jason, but just briefly before I let you jump in, I want to just add as a one point that people shouldn't overlook. There were lots of people who said spoiling your vote was dumb, it was a waste of time, why would you bother, it's just going to go in the bin. I think it is very obvious now that those people have been proven categorically wrong, and it would be good if some of those people acknowledged just how wrong they were. It's okay to be wrong. We're all wrong from time to time, but that was...
We're not.
Yeah, well, with present company excluded, of course. But yeah, clearly this is all a consequence of the electoral strategy that people have employed over the last couple of weeks. So anyway, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, it's funny. I was going to make that exact point, which is that this does serve as something of a rebuke to the people who are saying spoiling your vote is a worthwhile, worthless, I should say, a worthless endeavor, because certainly the way everything has played out since then would indicate that there's some serious soul searching going on, certainly in Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. Whether that will result in anything is obviously the question. As I indicated at the beginning, I'm not particularly convinced that this indicates anything. I think this always happens in the news cycle and in politics, which is that there'll be some sort of whooping will take place, there'll be some kind of backlash. Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil's intended strategies will fall apart for some reason or other. There's been too many instances of that to count over the past couple of years. And they'll sort of pay lip service to what they think people want to hear for a couple of weeks, and then it's right back on course. And the reason for that would obviously be because I think their sort of sentiments are correct as to what they think people want to hear. I mean, there was a poll out over the weekend that 82% of people think immigration is too high. Like, you rarely get that kind of unanimity on any kind of topic in politics. So this is a pretty safe one to sort of change your tune on. But then, as we've also mentioned on a couple of occasions already, you have all of the sort of ingrained interests come into play, like, yeah, the NGOs, the activists, the commentariat, who are much more liberal in their opinions than your average Joe in the street.
The lawyers who make a fortune off it.
Yeah, exactly. The lawyers who make a fortune of it, who'll start having their input, and because they're much closer to government and they have their ear, that's when the sort of I suppose I was gonna say it's when the screws start being applied, but it doesn't really, because like government is the one who holds all the cards here. It's so funny that it's sort of flipped now that you've got the government sort of cowering away from these voices, where they really should sort of double down here. And I mean, a perfect example of the how to say tables, them attempting to turn the tables on government here. I was listening to RT radio this morning, as is my unfortunate habit, and they had I hope I'm not going to mistake his name here. Is Nick Henderson of the Irish Refugee Council, I think it is. And in light of that heinous incident at the Dundalk IPAS Centre, which you condemned on X, I don't, not that anyone needs to comment on anything. I'm really, this is just a complete tangent, but I am really against this culture of like, oh, you have to issue a comment about this, you have to issue a comment about this. It's like we live in a complicated world. There's a whole lot of normal reasons people do and don't comment on different things, and trying to see a pattern in what people speak about. I think other than like politicians who do have a bit of a duty to be commenting on certain things, well, that's neither here nor there. The point here, anyway, is that that was a absolutely dreadful thing, and you would obviously hope that the people who do it are brought to justice.
I just for if you have no idea what we're talking about, basically an IPAS center in Dundalk was set on fire. Nobody knows who did it yet, or why, or what the circumstances are. But there were people in it at the time, including children and a young baby. So that's like clearly appalling. I think we all agree. But apologies.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely necessary context. Anyway, Nick Henderson's on RT Radio 1 this morning, and he was saying that this is why it's so important to be careful about your rhetoric around all of these things. And he, if I remember correctly, he was essentially making the case that the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach's comments were very irresponsible. Their recent comments on immigration were very irresponsible in light of the sort of social context and the sort of temperature around this issue currently. And it's like, he was saying that he's open to debate, and it's like, that's fine, you know, be open to debate all you want. But this very thing is a sort of policing or tone policing or a conversation policing tactic, I suppose, to put it this way, which is that like what the Taoiseach and Taoiseach said were perfectly reasonable opinions shared by the vast majority of people in Ireland. That is clear. That's uncontroversial. Nevertheless, you have someone come out who says that, like, you know, you'd really want to think twice about saying things like that, because if you don't, you're going to have mad attacks like these on IPAS centers. And it's like, actually, it's quite the opposite. If politicians start speaking like this, I 99% certainty say you're going to see less of these things, because the whole reason, I think, again, leaving aside the fact that we don't know the motivations of the people who did this or who did it or anything like this, but, you know, take like riots and protests and all of these different things that I'm sure Mr. Henderson had on his mind as he was talking about the sort of volatile social temperature around all of this. I guarantee you, well, we've said it before on this podcast, a lot of this would be diffused if politicians started talking about the issue, and if they started, you know, addressing it in a way that, you know, reasonable people think is reasonable. So quite the contrary, like I guarantee you, the way to keep ratcheting up the temperature is to keep, every time a politician says something reasonable about immigration, is to try and shut them up about it, and to ensure that they can't comment on things that everyone knows need to be commented on. So your suspicion is correct. I think that Taoiseach and Taoiseach's comments will be uh, fear-inducing for NGOs and activists and people who are very much out of step with public opinion on this one. Not obviously, as we've said before, the public opinion is the gauge of morality in all things, but certainly here, I think it's just common sense, and everyone knows it.
Yeah, totally. Because I mean, the thing is, this is such a radical departure for both Micheál Martin and Simon Harris. They clearly took a big gamble in their own minds with doing it. I don't think it's a big gamble. I think that it's a very safe bet that the public have been crying out for this sort of a change in direction. But this is Micheál. That's shocking. Have you any humanity, Martin? You know, we all remember the clip of him talking to Neil Prendeville, and Neil was effectively just telling him, "Look, there's a number of people who are coming from safe countries. They're an immediate cost to the state once they arrive in Ireland, and they have no right to be here. So shouldn't we just close the border?" Oh, and by the way, before he said close the borders, Micheál asked him, "Well, what would you do?" And Neil Prendeville at that point indulged him by saying, "Well, I would close the borders." And then Micheál goes, "Oh, that's shocking. Have you any humanity?" If I was Neil, I'd say, I don't have to answer what I would do. I could answer. I have a prescribed policy proposal that would fix the problem, but I'm a journalist. That's not my job. You're the guy in charge. Like, it's not. What do you mean? What would I do? Are you interviewing me now? Like, what is this? So that, I think, alone was outrageous. But just like a few months ago, the Taoiseach thought it was outrageous example of inhumanity to talk like this. And now the minute it's politically expedient, there's been a pivot that is blatantly obvious for everyone to see. Simon Harris in 2019 was one of the first people out of the traps to condemn Verona Murphy, because Verona Murphy was a Fine Gael candidate in the Wexford by-election that year. And she said that the number of asylum seekers coming into the country from areas that were controlled by Islamists like ISIS was concerning. And we don't know if these people have been radicalized. And so we should take measures to ensure that there are de-radicalization, I suppose, protocols in place to make sure that we don't see a London Bridge style attack in our streets here in this country because we're letting in people and we don't know anything about them or their beliefs. Totally and utterly reasonable concern, which, by the way, has since been vindicated time and time again. How many cases have we seen of radicalized nut jobs attacking people since then? We don't need to get into specific examples. You all know the litany of instances I'm thinking of. And so she was absolutely right. And Fine Gael deselected her as a candidate over that and dropped her, causing her to run as an independent, whereupon she won, by the way. So for all the media storm and controversy and, oh my gosh, how could you say that? Apparently the people of Wexford weren't that upset about it, and that woman is now the Count Corla. So, ha ha ha. But regardless, Simon Harris at the time said that the decision to deselect Miss Murphy is looking better by the moment. And he said, I think anybody who engages in stoking what I believe are unfounded racist fears has no place in the Fine Gael party. I thought the comments this morning gave a great insight into why she was deselected. So this is the way Simon Harris thought about these issues just a few years ago. And now he's saying that the left are the people who are primarily responsible for stifling debates around immigration. He's right about that, but it'd be very nice if he acknowledged his own role in stifling debates around immigration that he and his colleagues have engaged in for years now, including the Taoiseach and so on. I don't think they should be allowed to memory hole their participation in that entire farcical chapter now that we seem to be moving out of it.
Yeah, it's a funny one. In terms of practical takeaways from their change of tune, we spoke about this previously on the podcast, and it came to mind over the weekend. And indeed, I only read an article from John this morning, which was also making this point, which is that when I saw the initial reaction to both the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach's comments, there were a lot of people who would obviously be critical of the government's immigration policy, who were kind of attacking the Taoiseach and Taoiseach and saying, "Oh, it took you guys long enough," or saying, "The damage is done at this stage," all of that kind of thing. What people need to understand is that Irish politicians, perhaps better than anyone, you need to picture them as like having licked their finger and standing there like that and trying to tell which direction the wind is blowing. Like, this is what they just do constantly. You do have other countries where a politician or a administration or whatever other way you want to put it comes in with a particular agenda and they say, this is how we're doing things. This is not how it is in Ireland, certainly not with this crowd. They're trying to tell constantly where the mood is at on different things. That might seem unbelievable given that they sort of seem to go against public mood so consistently, but that's because, as I say, they're sort of listening to NGOs and activists who disproportionately have their ear. But in this instance, as I say, I saw a lot of people criticizing this initially, and it seems to me rather that if you liked what they were saying, you'd be much better off saying, for example, here, more of that, please. Because when sort of, as I say, a recent poll showed over 80% of people saying that, and not that this is a groundbreaking finding or anything from this latest poll, but it just corroborates what we already knew, which is that this is an easy win for the government if they will just, listen to what people are saying and go in on that. So I do think it would behoove people who are concerned about the state of things actually to say, like, yeah, exactly, more of that, please, and essentially kind of reward in a small way that kind of public recognition, to put it that way.
I'm gonna slightly disagree with you a little bit, because generally, I would be of that view. I would say, listen, even if politicians have been saying really stupid things, the minute they start saying something right, instead of attacking them for that too, you almost want to train them in like a Pavlovian fashion. Like so. So at that point you should say, look, at least you got there in the end, and kind of leave them off. That would generally be my perspective. But in this instance, I think there does have to be an acknowledgement of wrongdoing on their part before that can happen. Like, I was a lot more lenient personally with Willie O'D when he condemned the hate speech bill, and I asked him, "But hang on, you voted for the hate speech bill. What are you talking about?" And he said, "Look, to be honest, I didn't read it before I signed it. That was really dumb. There's lots of legislation coming through here, and you can't always take a proper look at it. And
My word.
I acknowledged I messed up. Basically, I fully, it's on me. I own it, and my apologies. And I was horrified when I read it back, and now I'm fully opposed to it." You could say lots of critical things about that. You could say that's pretty outrageous, but he's acknowledging he made a mistake. And so when people acknowledge they make a mistake and they apologize and they change their position radically, at that point you kind of say, or at least I am inclined to say, look, okay, fine, fair enough. But when you don't even acknowledge that there was any wrongdoing, and you try to just seamlessly change your view and act like that was always your view, and denied that 10 minutes ago you were calling people names for holding your exact current position, I don't think they should be let away with that. I think there needs to be an acknowledgement of wrongdoing there before we can just move on like nothing happened. But that's my perspective.
No, no, I agree entirely. Far be it for me to suggest that accountability also shouldn't be pursued, but I think just on the level of sort of messaging, at the very least, or signaling to politicians what you kind of want to see or hear from them. Yeah, absolutely. Just say, point out the inconsistency. Say that, yeah, people 2 weeks ago would have been called far right for holding this opinion or whatever. But I do think that it's important, at least, that the message also gets through to them that, this is good, this is what people want to hear, and to proceed from that basis. But would you like to hop over to the next thing that we wanted to discuss? Because I see we're getting on a bit, and this is one as well that I think that a lot of people have been pointing out for a long time, and whatever culture there is in government currently has sort of denied or downplayed, and now they're out here with another admission. At least it seems an admission to me. Would you like to explain what it was you reported on yesterday, Ben?
Yeah, so the government have often been accused of trying to be the best boys in the class when it comes to the European Union. I'm sure we've all heard this phrase. We know that Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are Europhiles to the hilt. They absolutely love Brussels. They love the European project, and they see Ireland as very much being at the core of the European ethos, as it were. And so they get accused of being bootlickers, and oh, you guys are just trying to suck up to the EU, and if the EU says jump, you guys say how high, and yada yada. And they get accused of this a lot by critics of the government who would be from a more kind of Eurocritical perspective, like myself, for example. Not that I accuse them of that other stuff. I mean, I am of a more Eurocritical perspective. But what's remarkable is Jack Chambers, who is the infrastructure minister, is after coming out and saying that they need to now reevaluate how they're implementing European regulations around house building and things, because often we've gone beyond what they've asked of us. So the European Union will set a certain standard and say, okay, when you're engaging in construction and building projects, you have to set your standards this high. And we've deliberately set it this high. And what that has done is we've tied ourselves in regulatory knots where now the Taoiseach is saying, actually, European regulations and our implementation of them is holding back housing delivery, and it's causing major problems and bureaucracy and red tape that's contributing to the housing crisis. And so we're going to have to look at that, particularly around things like environmental NGOs and environmental standards, which then opens the door for environmental NGOs, many of which are funded by the government and receive the vast majority of their funding from the state, taking the state to court and jamming up the works. So whenever we try to build a new project like a wastewater treatment facility or whatever it is, NGOs that we pay as taxpayers to exist are then suing the government, and it ends up in the courts for years, and then that's why you can't get a house. So you're literally paying to block your own housing developments. Like, this is the madness that the state has been engaging in. And having this being the situation for years, now the Taoiseach is going, you know what? That's actually causing problems, and I think we should take a look at fixing it. Like, again, I really, really want to be constructive. You want to be helpful. You want to say fair play when the penny has dropped and you've acknowledged a problem. But it is a big galling that they're only coming to these conclusions now when so many people have been screaming at them that this is a problem. Forget Gript. Okay, you don't want to listen to Ben Scott. You don't want to listen to John McGurk. You don't want to listen to Matt Tracy. Okay, screw us. Forget us. We're just cranks in the corner. Don't worry about us. The Construction Industry Federation of Ireland is telling you this. All different kinds of business think tanks and various, like, quote unquote, the reputable, the great and the good, the Irish Times approved, perfectly mainstream sources are telling you this. And it's only now in late 2025 that this has apparently become something that government is cognizant of. So really unbelievable stuff.
Yeah, but on the other hand, they're being told all that on one side, and then on the other hand, they were being told regulation time by Brussels. So there was always going to be one winner there. But it was interesting, a point that he made, that both that he and James Brown had mentioned as being particularly problematic were judicial reviews, and they were describing them. Who was it? It said Darragh O'Brien had described, he'd hit out of what he described as a small number of lawyers who were making a lot of money by taking judicial reviews on behalf of clients and stalling essential infrastructure projects. And he said that a cottage industry had been created in Ireland around this sort of conduct. He said that I would put it that many he said, this is a quote, I would put it that many brackets judicial reviews on close brackets themselves are just delay tactics and effectively more a cottage industry. And you're saying a small number of lawyers are making a lot of money from it and are delaying schemes for the state. So, like, it's kind of as with so many things in Ireland, it's like you have a clique of people who are benefiting from this, who the state has sort of been happy to walk along hand in hand with for. I mean, the state is obviously in this context antagonizing this group. But as you say, they should have been able to recognize that parasitical relationship a lot earlier than they seem to have recognized it. I think, particularly in relation to this, I mean, it was really funny the way you opened it up, which is that they're sort of acknowledging now that, they had these regulations, but their great crime was nearly that they were too zealous in terms of their application of the regulations, and now they're having to look back at their zeal and undo the damage essentially, and figure out how they sort of scale it back. And I really think that's going to be sort of the story of the Irish state and the first 25 years of the 21st century to sort of estimate what that trend might look like. Because this is a complete tangent here, but obviously another one that they've sort of backed themselves into a corner on over the past couple of years, and that remains a live issue because we've committed obviously to 50% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030, and then to, if I remember correctly, net zero by 2050. And last week, it's funny, this was one that we could have discussed, but it came to mind while we were talking about this. Bill Gates, who was one of the leading proponents, I suppose, of climate activism over the past couple of years, published a pretty amazing essay in which he was essentially, arguing against climate alarmism and sort of doomsday climate predictions and things like that, which, as I say, is amazing, because the way this relates to what we're talking about here is that climate alarmist doomsday perspective has been taken to the heart of every European institution, nearly, certainly the EU, certainly the Irish government, and there's a heavy price to be paid because of that. And now one of the, most zealous advocates and ardent adherents to that, Bill Gates, comes out and says, yeah, actually, we probably shouldn't carry on that way. There's a much more common sense way to go about this, which is what the critics have been saying all along. So, counting the cost of misplaced zealotry is going to be an enormous task over the next 5 years, certainly, because I think that's when a lot of this stuff is going to be really biting. And as I say, stuff that could have been avoided all along. Because yeah, whatever about yeah, you want to paint Gript as cranks and far right lunatics or whatever, by all means. But there were lots of people other than us pointing this stuff out over the past couple of years. You've got completely ordinary Irish organizations like it was the IFSC, the Irish Friends of some climate organization. I can't it doesn't come to mind right now. Who's made up of like scientists, made up of like all of these different people. You've had engineers saying that these targets are unworkable, and people who are more than respectable enough to be platformed by RTE and to be reported on by the Irish Times and everyone else. But those voices essentially just fell on deaf ears. So yeah, counting the cost of zealotry, that's going to be the tale of the next 5 years.
Yeah, God rest his soul, the late Ray Bates, Professor Ray Bates, who was an extremely well respected, credentialed climate scientist. He used to work for NASA's Goddard space program. He was an Irish guy, lived in Dublin. He had worked for Met Éireann for years, and he studied climate science for years. We have an interview with him on the Gript website if people want to look at our YouTube channel or any of our, just type in Gript, Professor Ray Bates, and you'll find it. And he didn't deny that climate change was real. He didn't say humans have no role in it. But all he said was that he thought the climate alarmism was way over the top and that the data didn't support it. And he said that it's more of a long-term threat that, like, in the next few centuries, it's something we'll probably have to worry about. And maybe we should start thinking about it now, but that it's not going to kill us all in 5 years, the way like Al Gore tells you. And that was his basic perspective. He was totally refused access to the Citizens Assembly on climate change. He was allowed to stay there as long as he sat at the back and didn't say anything effectively. He wasn't able to present to the people who were in attendance. He wasn't able to give an alternative perspective, which, by the way, again, we keep going on tangents within tangents, but just to briefly, as an aside, it shows what a Potemkin village farce the Citizens Assembly is. It's all a contrived scam from top to bottom. No result of any Citizens Assembly is worth the paper it's printed on. It's totally and utterly, like, it's the fact, if you look at the resolutions within them, I should do a video about this if I haven't already. You'll look at a resolution, like, let's say, I'm going to make one up off the top of my head. Let's say, should turf be banned? And when you ask the general public about it in like an Ipsos poll, the vast majority of people are opposed to that. They say, no, it shouldn't be banned, leave it alone. And then within the Citizens Assembly, not only will the majority of people support it, but it'll be like such an overwhelming majority. It's like Robert Mugabe numbers. It's like
120% of people agreed with the motion.
Yeah, exactly. It's like numbers you don't see outside of rigged dictators when they're running for re-election. And this, we're to believe, is a perfectly reasonable representation. Because basically what they do is they get 100 people into a room, and then they'll bring in a like hand-picked so-called expert after hand-picked so-called expert, and they just bombard you. They'll just have you watch like 20, 30 presentations.
You literally have your eyelids held open and just this hypnotic circle on the screen.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and no matter what it is, not to sound like some kind of Bible thumper, but there's like a great Bible verse which is just great wisdom in general, no matter who you are, which is every case right, it sounds right until you hear the opposition, which is very true. Like, if all you heard was Jeffrey Dahmer's defense attorney giving why he's a saint, you would walk out of the courtroom thinking, Janie Mac, this guy's the most innocent man who ever lived.
This young man's been hard done by.
Yeah, why are they persecuting this poor guy? Like, and then it's not until you hear the cross-examination and the other side that you go, oh, right, he's a lunatic serial killing cannibal. So my point is, if you were to sit through 30 presentations on anything, I don't care what the topic is, by the end of it, you'd be like, Janie Mac, maybe there's really something to this. And so it's not remotely surprising that the Citizens Assembly ends up producing results like it does, and that sure enough, could you believe that people came away supporting the government's initiative after hearing 20 government appointed people with doctor in front of their name give a prolonged presentation about why it's a great idea? Like, it's such a farcical anti-democratic sham, and
Well, it's like,
it should be called out at every opportunity.
it understands how people work. I mean, there's also the principle by which propaganda operates, which is that you just flood people's awareness and perception with the message you want them to have, and then you essentially people have a limited bandwidth, to use a technological term, and therefore, that which is occupying the majority of their space becomes sort of what they hold to then. So it's and this is even leaving aside obviously the citizens assemblies and things, but I do think this does speak to why cultures get ingrained in places and then remain there. Like, I mean, I obviously have never worked for the government, sort of don't plan on working for the government unless it's a Catholic theocracy, in which case I'll leave Gript and the spokesperson for the government, which is a joke, by the way. But I don't doubt that, like, the talk in the government to this point at this point is just all, Brussels brilliant. These regulations to be taken with the utmost seriousness, and the inside anyway, there was no. If there was pushback, it was clearly very ineffective and limited. But maybe with that said, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to say on it, because I'm positively chomping at the bit to get to the next topic. Not that I didn't enjoy this conversation, Ben. It's just that I found the next one to be of particular interest.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to proceed as planned.
Okay, so the next one teased at the beginning is the biggest bombs that every Western country is sitting on. And that's really not an exaggeration. I'll outline what it is before I say why that's not an exaggeration, which is that of pension liabilities. And the reason this is on my mind is because Grip's new columnist, who's been writing some great stuff, Cormac Lucy, wrote just a couple of days ago for Gript about national debt being 4 times what it seems. I'll read this paragraph out, and then we can get into discussing it. He said, "Consider the official figures. Ireland's official national debt, which excludes pension liabilities, was 214.3 billion last March. But in 2021, the state's pension liability, not included in those official debt figures, was 470.7 billion. On top of that, Ireland's public service occupational pension liabilities, which is owed to former employees of the state, were then estimated at 175.7 billion. You add those three figures together, and the official national debt of 214.3 billion jumps to 860.7 billion. To summarize this in layman's terms, what's at the heart of the issue here is that people are paying their state pension contribution now. They give that, not just in Ireland, but elsewhere, which contributes to the fact that it's a global problem, or certainly a Western problem. And states count that as income now, and they're like, "Oh, brilliant! Look at how much money we have," and things like that. But they don't really add it to the debt. Essentially, they say, "Look at all this money we have," and they don't add it to the debt, leaving aside the fact that they obviously need to pay the pensions of these people who've been paying into it their whole working lives. The reason this wouldn't be a huge problem if there was a huge swell of children coming behind who were all going to grow up to pay taxes and things like that. But there isn't. It's the whole thing is that people are having fewer kids, so societies are becoming these are slowly becoming these inverted pyramids, where you're having fewer and fewer young people, and you're having more and more old people.
So, like, sorry to interrupt it, because I do want to let you finish, but just briefly to, like, help if people are having trouble understanding the idea here, I'm going to make up the numbers. All right, so this isn't how it works really in society, but let's say in a society, a hypothetical society, there's one old retired person for every young working person. In that case, you only have to pay for the pension of one older person. So your tax liability is like here, it's at a relatively modest, manageable level. But let's say you've got a society where there's five old retired people for every one young working person, then your taxes have just increased exponentially because you have to pay to support these five people who aren't going to be able to work to support themselves because they're 95 years old. So you're now crushed by taxes as a young person, and it just ruins society at a fundamental level. So apologies, I know uh, most people probably get that, but for the few who maybe don't, it's kind of a complex subject.
Yeah, no, it's a complex subject, but the bottom line is this, which is that people are paying into the sort of public pension pot now, and they're not going to see the benefits of that. It's just there's no way in which they are. So the maths doesn't add up, and this is obviously where people always bring immigration into the picture, which is to say, well, therefore we need immigration so people can pay. And it's like there's a whole load of reasons why that doesn't work, but the main ones being is that it's actually a very, very small number of immigrants who actually contribute more than they take out of the system through welfare and different things like that. Um, and going forward, there's going to be massive competition for those high net worth immigrants, to put it that way. Um, Whereas there obviously won't be any competition for people who are coming to work, either not work or pay, very poorly paid jobs. So the basic situation is one where people are paying into the public pension pot. You got more and more old people, fewer and fewer young people, which means the people who are currently paying are going to be far less likely to see any return from what they're paying currently. It's just disastrous. Like, I don't. Governments are sort of trying to come to terms with this, but they're really Gary Kavanagh of Gript put up a good mini thread on this in which he was essentially saying that democracies are fundamentally ill-equipped to deal with this because it's hard to get buy-in, I suppose, to the measures that are required to fix something like this. Because what's required is ratcheting up the age at which people retire. Um, in France, was it 3 or 4 years ago? You had the government tried to raise the retirement age by like 2 years or something like that, which, in the grand scheme of things, isn't very much. And that kicked off, I mean, probably amongst other things as well, but that was one of the reasons that it kicked off the Yellow Vest riots, and you had massive unrest in the streets. I mean, if a government came and said that they were going to try and raise retirement age by like 15 years, which is in light of the problem, that would be reasonable. As Cormac pointed out in his piece, I can have it here. He's saying another factor is that life expectancy has been growing much faster than the age at which people retire. In Ireland in 1960, the year Cormac was born, as he says in the thing, the retirement age was 65 years, while average life expectancy was 68 years. Today, Ireland's retirement age is 66, while life expectancy has grown to 83 years. So, like, if you were to have an analogous, like, retirement age, um, in 2025, retirement age should be like 80 years old, never mind 65. So, over the last 65 years, therefore, the average time spent in retirement has jumped from 3 to 17 years, which is a pattern that can be seen across the Western world. Let's say, if you Google, what was the phrase that I Googled earlier? I don't know if I have it here. I don't have it here. It was essentially, oh yeah, I looked up like pensions time bomb. And if you look at the news articles, you can see a headline for pretty much every country in the Western world saying this is a ticking time bomb people are sitting on. France's pension time bomb, Germany's pension time bomb, Britain's pension time bomb. And it's because I was chatting about this with my wife, and it's just amazing how, and it's obvious that this is the way it works, that the times you live in completely condition your expectations. Like, growing up, I always just kind of expected that your, pension is going to be there. Leave it. Speaking about state pensions here, obviously leaving aside the fact that there are a whole load of other ways in which people kind of secure their wealth for their old age and things like that. Um, Increasingly popular, obviously, to invest in gold because the value never diminishes on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly. I probably wouldn't be about. You just feel a lot more kind of I don't know, timeless, I suppose, hoarding your gold than you do sort of trusting in a state public pension scheme. But anyway, this is it's really hard to convey simply what a huge problem this is going to be. Is essentially say governments are racking up a massive debt that they're not going to pay off. That debt, in many ways, is to the taxpayer, to the people who are paying into the pension pot. And it's like, what do you think happens when there isn't the money there to pay people's pensions? It's like, obviously, predicting the future is a fool's game because the world is so complex. There's no way to guess exactly what's going to take place. Like, you would say massive riots, but it's like, it's also the case that people are getting older. Older people aren't as prone to rioting as younger people. So it's very hard to say what it'll look like, but suffice to say it'll be calamitous.
And
There's
and like the problem is the government, obviously governments are to blame. Clearly they're the primary people who are to blame. But and you're never supposed to attack the audience or to criticize the general public. That's always considered like a bad idea or bad practice. But the public are culpable to a certain extent
100%.
because they reject all of the possible options that would fix it. It's okay to reject some of the options. We all dislike some of them, but when you just say no to everything, what is the government supposed to do? So we already referenced some of the solutions. You're like, okay, well, we've got too many old dependents who need to be supported by too few young workers. So what are we going to do about it? All right, we could raise the pension age. Absolutely not. Hate that idea. Don't want to do it. Okay, fine. We won't do that. We could import people from abroad. We could bring in immigrants to work, and that maybe that would help. No, absolutely not. We hate mass immigration. We don't want that. Okay, fair enough. We could euthanize old people and just straight up kill them Canada style, and that way we don't have to support them anymore. Oh my gosh, that's horrible. How could you do that to my granny? By the way, I agree all of those things are horrible. I don't want to act like I'm defending those measures. They're horrible measures. And then there's the last option. Okay, why don't you have more kids? If everybody had way more kids, then we would have a bigger workforce in the future, and then it wouldn't be a problem. Oh no, I don't want to be doing that, you Catholic fundamentalist freak. Don't be trying to control my life. I'll do what I want. My life is my own business, and you stay out of my family life, and blah blah blah. So if you don't want to have more kids, you don't want to bring in more workers from abroad, you don't want old people to work longer, and you don't want to kill old people, then what's the solution? And you don't want to just have people lose their pension and say, okay, well, then we don't have any money for you, tough. You don't want that either. So you don't want any of the solutions. And by the way, some of them are horrible solutions. I don't want some of those solutions either. But something has to be done. And for me, I would obviously favor people just having bigger families, having pro-natalist policies. That's the most natural solution. It's the most obvious solution, the most painless solution. That's what I would support and what Jason and probably many of our viewers would support. But many people are just as opposed to that as they are to all the other stuff. So at that point, you have to really say, you need to decide what's important to you and just make that calculation. Like, because it is a huge problem that needs to be fixed somehow.
Well, I do think the way they're going to fix it, I don't want to indulge in pessimism too much because obviously, as I said just a couple of moments ago, you've no idea what way the future is going to go. And, being Catholic, I like to sort of, so wonders can manifest themselves out of nothing because God is capable of that. But based on the sort of trends that you're seeing, I'm inclined to think that, like, obviously euthanasia is growing at scale in Canada, to use that example. It is present in other places, but Canada is the most, like, shocking situation where it's just growing and really becoming a sort of cultural institution nearly, where it's like, it's just as valid an option, as a way out of life as, like, natural death. And they're kind of like an outlier at the moment doing their own thing over there. And I think that this is going to become much, much more common in the future. Because I just don't see why. Again, I think euthanasia is absolutely horrend. I mean, people who follow me on X and have written a couple of articles about it in the past. People won't be surprised by that. But I think that like a state looking at the calculus with this would obviously be very susceptible to the suggestions from pro euthanasia campaigners that this is a way to limit how much you're going to have to pay out in the future. It's like, you can either pay someone's pension for like, yeah, 17 years, or you can like really start pushing with the euthanasia propaganda and suggestions that people, take this as a way out, especially. And again, we're getting it, we're already in speculative territory here. I mean, this whole time we've been in speculative territory because no one knows exactly what shape the future is going to take. But it's just like, I don't see any other way in which this really plays out. It's like if the money isn't there and people don't have kids, and it's like it's very hard to imagine what future society is going to look like. That it's not going to look like the society we live in now is very clear. What it is going to look like, it's really hard to imagine. And as I say, on a purely natural level, there aren't too many reasons to be optimistic about that. Because I mean, the way people would say that this might be offset would be kind of like because look at the situation as it stands. It's like you've got a shrinking population, the profile of which is changing, where you have more old people and fewer young people, and that's just kind of shrinking. In order for the sort of societal model that we have at the moment to be maintained, that's premise that relies on growth, which is where the sort of desire to bring in immigrant workers, even though as we outlined already, there's many reasons why that's not a good idea and why that wouldn't work. But anyway, that's what they sort of try.
I know that's not your primary point and you're building to a point, but just to briefly add in on that, one reason we know that that's not going to work as far as just bringing in immigrants to fix the pension problem is over half of adults in Ireland's emergency homeless accommodation system were foreign nationals, according to the most recent data as of September. So more than half. So these are the people who were supposedly bringing in to help with the pension crisis. They're homeless, which I'm not criticizing them for that. God bless them, and I hope they get sorted out and they find themselves in a better position. But they literally can't even take care of themselves, let alone you or your granny. So anyway, that's neither here nor there.
And I mean, there's also the fundamental problem here, which is that, like, even if, say, that was able to keep the show on the road, all that does is kick the can down the road, which is that, well, these people are all going to get old too by virtue of being human. And then you're faced with the same problem because in many of these countries, the birth rate is also suboptimal, to say the least. But the point I was just going to build to is like, well, if you're not going to like go all in on growth, then you have to accept a contracting society, which also looks very different. And one of the only ways that can be managed is sort of like high tech solutions, the likes of which, like, where you get like, I don't know, technology to pick crops and to do sort of essential jobs that are required in order for things to keep going, essentially. And it's like there are a handful of countries in the world maybe capable of doing that, if even. That's no sure thing. Like Japan is one that I think is kind of opting in that direction. And like, 'cause Japan is obviously famously extraordinarily conservative on immigration. They seem to have kind of flirted with opening up a little bit in light of their demographic issues, and then they very quickly shut the door again. And they're like, yeah, we don't want to head down that road. And so the option that's left open to them is sort of like, yeah, high tech solutions to cater to their aging and shrinking society. And it's like, well, that's also an experiment. No one knows how that works out. So I think it's worth talking about this topic just because, this is an impending situation, to put it mildly. And it's one that most people aren't aware of. You just sort of like live your day to day and sort of assume that things are always going to chug on as they've been chugging on. And this is like a slap in the face to that. It's like, no, there's a deadline on pretty much everything you're doing here, because like once you've got a yeah, once the governments essentially go bankrupt, once states go bankrupt or go near bankrupt, in the face of this, it's going to be a very ugly situation. As I said a couple of times, what that looks like exactly, who knows? But it's not going to be pretty.
And it also shows the limitation of radical individualism and the idea that what I do doesn't matter and I can do what I want and mind your own business and so on. If you have obviously this shouldn't even need to be said. Clearly, if people cannot have children by no fault of their own for an actual medical reason or whatever, that's totally different. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how if by choice you have less than 3 children, you're part of this problem. Because, and by the way, I have less than 3 children. I hope to rectify that in the future, as does Jason. So I hope to rectify that. I hope to have a lot more kids than I currently have. But in general, the reason I say 3 is because that's above replacement rate. If you've got a man and a woman and they have 2 kids, then you've just replaced yourself. That's not. Whereas if you have 3 kids, now you have brought more people into the world than you, and you have expanded in the next generation. So if there's people running around here with 5 kids, 6 kids, or whatever, when it all goes horribly wrong, you can't blame them. They did their part. Whereas if somebody's like, nah, I just didn't really feel like it. I didn't want to have kids, so I just didn't, or I only had one and I kind of left it at that. If that's you again, like I can't kick down your door and force you to order your family in a certain way, nor would I want to. But you have to be cognizant of the fact that that has consequences for broader society, and this is one of them. You are part of the contributing factor to this problem, and so your decisions do have an impact on the world more broadly, whether you want it to or not. It's not just people trying to meddle in your personal life. There's real
It's
consideration.
interesting because an article by a couple of friends of mine, they have they're a married couple and they've got a Substack, Tradical, I think it's called. The husband, Dr. Callum Miller, is a very prominent pro-life speaker and activist. And he was in South Korea, I think it was last week, giving like attending some events in relation to that. And he and his wife was there with him, and they wrote an article about South Koreans, how interesting South Korean society is, essentially, because South Korea has the worst birth rate in the world. I think that it's like 0.7 or something like this as their TFR. And it's entered into popular consciousness that South Korea, as we knew it, is essentially done for. And now I do just want to qualify all of this by saying, like, I think everything you said is absolutely correct about how if you want to keep the show on the road, you do have to be having like 3 kids and things like that. And I think that's just correct. You can't argue that.
And by the way, that's bare minimum. Like ideally, much more than that. Like ideally, we're talking 5, 6, 7, as many as you can. But 3 is like the floor. If it's below 3, it's a problem. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. It's like, but I was also going to preface that by saying, like, it also rubs up against my Catholic sensibilities to be kind of utilitarian, I suppose, about kids and about how many kids people should be having. Because obviously, I think the worldview is primarily the people were made to come to know and love God, and often a way in which that manifests is by being open to life and having kids and things like that. But I also think that, like, when you start sort of thinking about how, like, kids are needed in order to sort of sustain the pro-growth model, it's like you're ultimately not aiming at the right thing. You're kind of aiming at sort of sustaining growth as opposed to, say, sort of genuinely knowing and loving God. I'm obviously not sort of critiquing you here. It's just a way in which my thinking has kind of changed on the topic. I'm trying to figure out how best it ought to be talked about. But just back to the South Korean point, which is that they were observing that as there are fewer children in South Korea, so they saw very few of them around. And one of their most striking trips was when they went to one of the biggest shopping centers in South Korea, and they didn't encounter a single child while they were there, which is just amazing. But they did say that everything has been kind of childified, or everything has become really childish, which is that, like, there's fewer kids, but you go into cafes and it's really cutesy anime and K-pop and all of this kind of stuff. And I do feel that as people try to, like, prolong youth and prolong comfort and prolong living standards that they experienced themselves while they were children, they've cut the legs out from underneath the thing, which provides all of that, which is proper maturity and adulthood. It's the most amazing dynamic. But yeah, we wait and see how this plays out. We've gone on a big long tangent here away from the topic, but it's an endlessly fascinating one. As we said at the top of the episode, it is one to keep your eye on because yeah, it's not coming tomorrow. It's not the sort of dynamic thing that's going to fill your news feeds constantly. But I do think it's going to be, provided all of us do live the sort of expected lifespan of our times, which is, 60, 70, 80 years. This is going to be one of the key changes that you experience. So interesting all the same.
This is the kind of thing that within our lifetime could lead to civil wars across the world. So it's like that serious,
Yeah, major instability.
It is like a tangential like domino effect, So yeah, definitely one. I mean, look, I'll put it this way: I'll be certainly aiming to produce a football team of children, including a few subs, if indeed the good Lord has that in mind for me. But that's to each their own. Obviously, we all have to make.
It is on a personal level. There is just, and again, as sort of Catholics, you are inclined. You do hope, and it's like I've seen the way when you face challenging personal circumstances, God always gets you through them, and it's just how He works. It's like there's no situation too challenging that you can't be brought through it. And it's the same for anyone who would walk with Him, but. Yeah, on a human level, you obviously really worry about, say, the world that your kids are going to be moving into. Because, like, I look at my son and daughter, who are 2 years old and 8 months old, respectively, and it's like, oh, what the hell sort of world are they going to be operating in? Where all the things we're talking about have come to pass. It's like, yeah, states have gone bankrupt essentially because of their pension welfare commitments and all of these things.
You can't get a job because of AI.
If you can't get a job because of AI, they're living in like completely fractured societies in which social cohesion and trust have broken down massively. So it would
Your choices. There's like debates happening in society, and the only political parties you have to join are the Communist Party and the Nazi Party. What if I want to be normal? Can I choose that? No, you can't.
It's like extreme material circumstances do lead to extremes. I mean, that was the breeding ground in Germany in the 1920s and 1930s, for the extreme that manifested itself there. So it's like it's an ugly situation. Obviously, there's so many different elements in the mix. Like the fact that, as I say, back then you had still fairly normally proportioned societies with lots of youth. Whereas now the pyramid is, say, inverting, which may well result in different dynamics itself. So it's all very interesting, but look, we live in hope.
Absolutely. And with that said, we will catch you all at the next episode of the Long Game Podcast next week. God bless everybody.
God bless.